Hello there, my sleepy fellows. Welcome back to the gentle hills and winding paths of Middle-earth, where the night air hums softly with stories that have drifted through time like wandering leaves. Tonight, we will follow a path few have ever walked, a path that stretches far beyond the Shire's gentle borders, westward toward secrets lost to all but the wisest. This is the story of the secret paths to Valinor and the dangerous journey that led one gentle soul toward the very edge of the world. If you find comfort in these soft travels through Middle-earth, I invite you to like this story. Subscribe to this gentle company of listeners. Your little click helped me be motivated and keep creating more such stories. Before we begin this quiet journey, let me offer you a soft invitation. Settle in a little deeper. Find your most comfortable place, whether wrapped in a warm blanket, your head resting gently against a pillow, or nestled somewhere quiet where the world feels far away. This is your time now, your quiet moment to let the weight of the day drift from your shoulders like leaves floating down a slow river. Tonight's tale is a special one, a story wrapped in both wonder and mystery, whispered only in the quiet corners of Middle-earth's long memory. It is said that beyond the shores of this world, far beyond the western seas, lies the hidden land of Valinor, where the air is golden and time flows like gentle water, a land where sorrow cannot walk and where even the oldest wounds find peace. But how does one reach such a place? That is the question few have dared to ask. For there are no maps to Valinor, no roads marked on any parchment. There are only secret paths, paths that drift in and out of legend, known only to those whose hearts can hear the song of the sea calling them home. Together, we will walk along the westernmost edges of Middle-earth, where the sky touches the sea and where the veil between worlds is thinnest. We will meet those who guard the paths and those who have walked them before, and we will learn, gently and slowly, that every journey, no matter how far, begins with a single step. But for now, my sleepy fellows, close your eyes if you wish and breathe softly. The secret paths wait, and the westward winds are calling. Let us follow them together as the night carries us into the gentle heart of the story. Our story does not begin with a hero or a warrior, nor with a wizard draped in wisdom or a king bound to fate. It begins, instead, with a quiet figure, a hobbit, of course, for it is often the smallest who hear the softest songs of the world. His name was Lóthwin, a name not remembered in songs or carved into any great stone, for his was not the sort of story that kingdoms preserve. But Middle-earth itself remembers him, in the way that old trees remember footsteps, and the wind remembers the hush of whispered secrets. Lóthwin was a quiet soul, even for a hobbit. He lived near the western edge of the Shire, in a burrow half covered with wildflowers and soft green moss. His home was smaller than most, and his garden was not the tidiest, for Lóthwin had a habit of wandering rather than weeding, and dreaming rather than digging. He would often sit at the edge of his garden, where the land sloped down toward the woods, and watch the sky change color as day slipped into dusk. There was something in his heart that the Shire could not quite fill, a longing for something he could not name, a pull like the tide calling to the shore. The other hobbits found him odd, of course. They always do, when someone's feet wander farther than the village green or the next warm hearth. Lóthwin was the sort who listened when the wind changed direction, who paused to trace patterns in the bark of old trees, and who always seemed to be looking westward, as though the sunset held a secret meant only for him. He had heard the old tales, the ones the gaffer told when the fire burned low, tales of ships that sailed west, into mists that never parted, of a land beyond sight, where the air itself was golden, and where sorrow could not follow. Most hobbits dismissed such stories as nonsense, the sort of thing elves talked about when they'd had too much wine. But Lóthwin listened, and somewhere deep inside him, the stories took root. He did not know why. He had no elven blood, no ancient gift of foresight. But still, the West called to him, not in words, but in quiet knowing. And so, though his feet had never walked beyond the borders of the Shire, Lóthwin found himself drawn into a story far older and greater than any he could imagine. It was not courage that set him upon the path, nor even curiosity. It was longing, that soft, aching feeling that lives in quiet hearts, the feeling that somewhere, far away, something waits for you, even if you cannot name it. Lóthwin's days unfolded like soft leaves, turning toward the sun, each one gentle and unremarkable to those who knew him. He woke to the scent of dew upon grass, to the quiet hum of bees drifting lazily between flowers, and to the soft shuffle of post being slid beneath his round green door. But within him, something stirred, something that had stirred for years, quietly, like the breeze that slips through a crack in the window at dusk. It was a feeling he couldn't name, a tug just beneath his ribs, urging him westward, always westward. At first, it was only a passing thought, a fancy he entertained while trimming his hedge or mending the latch on his garden gate. But in time, it grew sharper, like a whisper growing louder the longer it is ignored. He found himself drawn to books, though hobbits were not known for their libraries, and especially to the oldest tales. He visited old Bilbo Baggins, who had once been famous for his own adventures, though those were of a different sort. Bilbo was happy to humor him, though his stories tended toward treasure and dragons rather than the paths to the west. Still, one afternoon, as they sat with their pipes glowing softly in the garden at Bag End, Bilbo mentioned something almost in passing, a tale he had heard from the elves in Rivendell. "The West, you say?" Bilbo murmured, tapping his pipe thoughtfully. "The straight road, they call it, though no hobbit has ever walked it, not that I know of, at least. It's not the kind of road you find on any map, you know." Lóthwin's heart quickened. "Then how does one find it?" Bilbo laughed softly. "Oh, you don't find it. It finds you, or so the elves say. It's not a path of earth and stone, but of memory and longing. Only those who already belong to it ever see it clearly." Lóthwin didn't press for more. Something about the way Bilbo spoke made him feel that this was not a path Bilbo himself had ever wished to walk. Still, the seed had been planted. Lóthwin began to walk farther each evening, past the familiar lanes, beyond the well-trodden paths, toward the farthest fields where the Shire's green earth met the quiet sky. He would sit beneath an old oak tree that stood alone on the westernmost hill and watch the sun sink below the horizon. It was there, one evening, that something changed. The air grew still, not with the quiet of nightfall, but with something older, something watchful. The sky seemed to stretch farther, the light lingering longer than it should. The edges of the world felt softer, as though they were not entirely solid, and upon the breeze came a sound, not music, not words, but something in between. A soft hum, ancient and aching, full of memory and longing. Lóthwin closed his eyes, and for a moment he could see it, a path of silver light, stretching westward across the sky, vanishing into the sea. When he opened his eyes, it was gone, but the memory of it lingered, like the warmth left behind after a hand has rested on your shoulder. The next morning, Lóthwin packed a small bag, just enough food for a few days, a water flask, and an old wool cloak. He left no note. There was no need. Those who knew him would understand that this was something no words could explain. He walked west, past the hedgerows and gardens, past the lazy fields and the quiet streams, until the land began to change. The soft hills gave way to wilder country, wind-swept moors, where hawks circled overhead and the air tasted of salt. It was here that the road faded. The paths on his map ended, and before him lay only grass and sky. Yet Lóthwin walked on, trusting the quiet tug beneath his heart. As he walked, the world grew quieter. The birdsong faded. The breeze carried no scent. It was as though he had stepped out of the world he knew and into something older, something that remembered a time before hobbits even walked the earth. The first night, he camped beneath a twisted old tree, its branches pointing westward like fingers. The stars overhead were brighter than any he had seen before, as though they too were watching, guiding, and in the stillness he heard the hum again, that same soft song just beneath hearing, calling him forward. Days passed like dreams. Lóthwin walked alone, though he did not feel lonely. The earth seemed to walk beside him, the sky bending softly overhead. Sometimes, in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw figures standing on distant hills, tall and slender, their hair like silver light. But when he turned to look, there was nothing but wind and grass. On the fourth day, the land fell away suddenly, and before him lay the sea. It stretched wide and endless, the sky and water blending into one great sweep of color. The air was heavy with salt, and the tide whispered secrets to the sand. Lóthwin stood upon the cliff and felt this hug beneath his ribs grow stronger, as though his heart itself leaned toward the horizon. But there was no ship, no bridge, no sign of any path at all, only water and sky. He might have turned back then, if not for what happened next. From the sea, a mist began to rise, not gray, but gold, as though the very air had caught fire with the light of some distant sun. It drifted toward him, slow and soft, until it surrounded him completely. And within the mist, The path appeared, not of earth or stone, but of silver light, stretching out across the water. Lóthwin stepped forward. The ground beneath his feet did not feel like earth or wood, but something in between, a memory made solid, a dream given shape. The path led west, into the mist, toward the place where sky and water became one. He walked for hours, though time itself seemed to fold and bend around him. The sun rose and set, and rose again, but the sky never fully darkened. There was always light, soft and golden, as though the air itself remembered what it was like to stand beneath the two trees of Valinor long before the world was broken. At last, the mist parted, and before him stood a gate, not tall or grand, but simple and ancient, its wood smooth with age. Upon the gate, a single rune was carved, the symbol for return. Lóthwin knew then that this was not a path forward, but a path home, not to the Shire, but to the home all hearts carry, whether they remember it or not. He stood before the gate, his heart full and his feet trembling. This was the threshold few mortals had ever crossed, the secret path to Valinor, the road that lay beyond the world. Lóthwin stood before the gate, the mist curling softly at his feet like a gentle sea foam kissing the shore. His heart fluttered, not with fear, but with that tender, aching wonder one feels when standing at the edge of something long dreamed and half believed. His hand rested against the ancient wood, tracing the single rune carved there. Return. The path behind him had vanished into the mist, as though the world of Middle-earth had already drifted far beyond reach. All that lay before him now was this gate, this threshold to the unknown. With a breath as soft as the breeze, Lóthwin stepped forward, and the gate swung silently open, not from his strength, but from the weight of longing itself. Beyond the gate was no grand city, no towering spires of gold or silver. Instead, the path led downward into a valley draped in twilight, where the air shimmered faintly, as though reality itself was thinner here, stretched across something older, something far more ancient than stone or sea. The stars above were not the stars Lóthwin knew. They were brighter, sharper, closer, as if they were watching, as if they remembered him. He walked quietly, his footsteps making no sound upon the path. The grass glowed faintly, each blade kissed with light, as though it had known the touch of something holy long ago. The air carried no scent, save for something soft and sweet, a fragrance that stirred memories he did not know he had, a feeling of safety, of being held in the palm of something gentle and endless. Lóthwin had heard of Valinor in hushed stories, the land across the sea where the firstborn had sailed, leaving Middle-earth behind. But the stories spoke only of beauty, of light unending. They did not speak of this feeling, a sense that he had walked into memory itself, where time was not a river, but a circle folding back upon itself. At the center of the valley stood a figure, not tall like an elf, nor stout like a dwarf, but something in between, cloaked in robes the color of mist and sea foam. The figure's face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but the hands that rested gently upon a staff were ancient, weathered, yet strangely familiar. "Welcome," the figure said, voice soft as the evening breeze. "You have come far." Lóthwin bowed slightly, unsure whether words were needed. The figure turned, motioning for him to follow. They walked together through the valley, the mist parting before them like water around a stone. As they walked, images flickered at the edges of Lóthwin's sight, visions caught in the mist, moments both familiar and strange. He saw himself as a child, staring westward from his garden. He saw his mother, humming a soft song whose words he could not remember. He saw Bilbo, pipe smoke curling around his smile. "This is the place between," the figure said gently. "Not Valinor, not Middle-earth, but the seam that binds them." Lóthwin's brow furrowed. "I thought the path led straight to the Undying Lands." The figure chuckled softly. "No path ever runs straight, not the roads of earth, nor the roads of the heart." They paused at the edge of a still pool, its surface reflecting not only the sky, but something deeper. As Lóthwin gazed into the water, he saw a ship, the very ship that had carried the ring-bearers west, Frodo and Bilbo among them. But the image shimmered, and another ship appeared, one that had never sailed, its sails tattered, its hull broken. "The straight road does not open for all," the figure said, "even those who long for it." Lóthwin's heart sank slightly. "Then why am I here?" The figure's hood tilted slightly, as though considering the question. "Because you are a bridge, Lóthwin of the Shire, a heart that remembers both Middle-earth and the land beyond the sea." Lóthwin knelt beside the pool, the soft grass cool beneath his fingers. "I'm only a hobbit," he whispered. "What could I possibly have to do with the fate of Valinor?" The figure knelt beside him, resting a hand upon Lóthwin's shoulder. "Sometimes it is the smallest thread that binds the whole tapestry." The mist swirled, and within it, Lóthwin saw something strange, a memory not his own. He saw the first ships, built by the elves, slender and bright, their sails filled with starlight as they set out across the sea. He saw the grief in their eyes, leaving Middle-earth behind. He saw the dark waters rise, and the straight road curl away from mortal sight. And then he saw something that filled him with quiet sorrow, a lone hobbit standing at the edge of the sea, watching the last ship vanish. "It is not only the elves who long for home," the figure said softly. "There are others who carry the memory of the West, though they know not why." Lóthwin's breath caught. "My longing, it's not mine alone?" The figure stood, offering Lóthwin a hand. "No heart is ever truly alone. What you feel is an echo, passed down through stories, through memory, through earth itself." They walked on, the mist growing thinner until they stood at the very edge of the world. The sea stretched endlessly, silver and gold, as though the water itself carried light. Far across the horizon, just beyond sight, lay the shores of Valinor. Lóthwin's heart ached, not with sorrow, but with the sweetness of knowing that what he had longed for was real. Even if he could not touch it, he could see it, and seeing was enough. The figure turned to him once more. "The path to Valinor is not for your feet, Lóthwin, not yet. But you will return to the Shire, and when you do, you will carry this memory, not as a burden, but as a gift." Lóthwin felt tears prick his eyes. "But if I leave, Will I forget? The figures shook their head. Not all memory fades. Some memories are given to keep. The mist began to swirl again, wrapping around them both. One day, the West will call you again, the figure said softly, and when that day comes, you will know the way. Lóthwin stepped back through the gate, the silver path sheeting faintly beneath his feet. The mist thickened, the valley fading into a dream, until he stood once more on the western cliffs of Middle-earth, the sea stretching wide and empty before him. The memory lingered, soft, glowing, a light within his heart. He turned east, toward home, the longing still there, but no longer aching. It had become something gentler, a promise, whispered softly on the breeze. Lóthwin's feet carried him eastward, back toward the Shire, though his heart felt forever changed. The cliffs behind him, where sky met sea, had faded into the mist, and the silver path leading west had vanished like a dream upon waking. Yet the memory remained, soft and luminous, a warmth beneath his ribs, like the last glow of sunset after the sun has dipped below the horizon. His journey home was not swift, for Lóthwin had always been one to wander, but now every path seemed richer, every stone beneath his feet seemed to hum with life, as though the world itself had taken a deeper breath since his visit to the place between. Even the air smelled different, fresher somehow, as though each leaf and blade of grass remembered the same ancient light he had glimpsed in the mist. But the road to the Shire would not be a straight one, for Middle-earth, as you well know, does not give up its stories all at once. And so, as Lóthwin made his way through the wilder lands beyond the Shire, the world itself began to whisper to him tales older than hobbits, older than even the first rising of the sun. His first meeting came in a quiet wood where the trees stood taller than they should, their branches twisted like ancient fingers reaching toward the sky. Lóthwin had set his camp beside a still pool where stars reflected so clearly upon the water that he could not tell earth from sky. As he stirred his small pot of stew, the air shifted, not with wind, but with presence. From the shadows stepped a figure taller than any man, cloaked in soft gray-green, with hair like silver mist and eyes dark and deep as the roots of the world. It was an elf, though not like those who had walked the Shire's lanes at Bilbo's parties. This elf was older, more distant, like a song half remembered from a dream long forgotten. Lóthwin rose, unsure whether to speak, but the elf inclined his head gently and sat across from him without a word. They shared the stew in silence, and only after the fire had burned low did the elf speak. "You have walked a path few mortals find," the elf said softly. "The west has brushed your heart." Lóthwin's breath caught, for the elf spoke not in common speech, but in Sindarin, and yet Lóthwin understood. Somehow, the memory of that silver path had left him with the gift of hearing the elven tongue as though it were his own. The elf spoke of the firstborn, of the time before time when the stars alone lit the sky and the elves first woke beside Cuiviénen. He spoke of longing, the same longing that had filled Lóthwin's heart all his life, the call to the west, to a home they had never seen but always remembered. "Even the earth remembers Valinor," the elf said, Every stream that flows westward, every tree that leans toward the setting sun, they all remember the light of the two trees, though their roots never touched that soil. And so Lóthwin learned that his longing was not strange, nor even wholly his own. It was part of Middle-earth itself, a memory too large for any one heart to hold, passed gently from earth to sky, to leaf and stone, to wind and water, and now to a single hobbit who had dared to walk a path no hobbit should. Lóthwin walked on, and as the land rose into the hills near the edges of Eriador, he came upon a figure seated upon a weathered stone. It was a Dunedain, one of the wandering folk who guarded the quiet lands from unseen dangers. His cloak was worn, his sword resting beside him, and his face, though weathered, was kind. The ranger offered Lóthwin a seat beside him and shared a flask of clear water drawn from a hidden spring. They spoke of roads and weather, of quiet dangers and forgotten woods. But when the stars rose, the ranger's voice softened. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the ranger said softly. "The road that lies westward." Lóthwin's heart quickened. "How could you know?" The ranger smiled faintly. "We Dunedain are wanderers by fate, but not all wandering is done upon the earth. Some of us dream of the west, not because we will ever sail there, but because our blood remembers the ships that once set sail." Lóthwin listened as the ranger spoke of Númenor, the great island kingdom lost beneath the sea, where men once lived closer to the valor than any who came after. He spoke of the ban of the valor, the doom placed upon mortal feet, forbidding them from setting foot upon the shores of Valinor. "But your feet found the way," the ranger said softly, "because your heart did not seek to claim the west, only to remember it." Lóthwin asked why such a gift had come to him, a simple hobbit with no claim to elven blood or royal lineage. "Sometimes," the ranger said, "the West chooses the smallest voices because they sing the clearest." The days passed into weeks, and Lóthwin walked on, the stories gathering around him like a cloak woven from memory. In the foothills of the misty mountains, he met a wandering dwarf whose beard was silver-threaded, his hands stained from working stone. The dwarf had no longing for the West, nor any soft words for the elves who had left Middle-earth behind. But even so, the dwarf knew the story of the straight road. "It's the earth itself," the dwarf said, as they shared a meal beside a crackling fire. "Every stone remembers. The firstborn carved their longing into the very bones of the world, and now the earth carries it, whether it wants to or not." Lóthwin smiled, for even in the gruff voice of a dwarf, there was poetry hidden beneath the stone. As the Shire's green fields drew near, Lóthwin paused at the crest of a hill, looking back toward the west. The sea was far out of sight now, but he could still feel it, the pull, the whisper, the quiet promise, but it no longer ached. He understood now. The secret paths to Valinor were not just roads beneath the sky. They were written in the earth itself, in every stream that flowed west, in every breeze that carried the scent of salt, in every bird that flew into the setting sun. And as long as he remembered, as long as he carried the stories of elves, men, and dwarves alike, the path would never truly be lost. Lóthwin walked the last miles to his little home in the Shire, with a heart both full and light. His feet had wandered farther than any hobbit had walked before, and yet they brought him home with a deeper love for every stone, every tree, every quiet stream. And though he told no one of his journey, for who would believe such a tale, he carried the memory softly as a secret gift. Lóthwin stood at the familiar crest of the western hill, where he had once gazed into the sunset with only dreams to guide him. Now, his feet stood upon the very soil that had once carried his longing westward, and though the grass beneath his toes was unchanged, Lóthwin was not the hobbit he had been when he left. The straight road had not been just a path across the sea, it had been a path through himself. And now, even here, far from the silver gate and the misted shore, he could feel it, woven into the earth itself. The memory of Valinor hummed through the roots of the grass, through the whispering wind, through the quiet pulse of the land. But this was not a time for reflection alone. Something had stirred in the west, something Lóthwin could not ignore. He had been allowed to see the path, to walk the place between, not for his own sake alone, but because the world itself was shifting, and Middle-earth was remembering something it had tried to forget. That night, as Lóthwin settled into his old chair by the hearth, a knock came at the door, not the gentle knock of a neighbor borrowing flour, but a firmer, deliberate knock, like a hand long familiar with both sword and staff. When Lóthwin opened the door, a figure stood against the starlight, cloaked in gray, his wide-brimmed hat slightly askew, his eyes twinkling beneath brows that seemed to know every story ever told. Gandalf had come. The wizard stepped inside without a word, shaking rain from his cloak, though no rain had fallen in the Shire that day. He took the seat beside the fire as though it belonged to him, and only after the kettle began to boil did he speak. "You found it," Gandalf said softly. Lóthwin nodded. No need to ask what it was. They both knew. "And now," Gandalf continued, "you must understand why." Lóthwin set the teapot between them, hands trembling slightly. "Why would a hobbit, why would I, be shown the way to Valinor? I'm no elf friend, no ring-bearer, no hero. I don't belong in that story." Gandalf smiled, but his smile was touched with something older than joy. "That is exactly why you were shown, dear Lóthwin. Those who seek the road for glory will never find it. Those who desire to possess its beauty will only see mist and waves. But those who walk with longing, with wonder, and with no thought of claiming what lies at the end, those are the ones who glimpse it." Lóthwin shook his head. "But why? Why does it matter if one simple hobbit feels the west calling?" Gandalf's eyes grew serious, the firelight reflecting gold within them. "Because the memory of Valinor is fading, not only in elven songs, but in the earth itself. Each year, the straight road drifts farther from sight. Each year, fewer hearts remember how to listen. The longing that stirred in you, it was not your own alone. It was the land itself reaching out, calling you to remember what others have begun to forget." Lóthwin's heart sank slightly. "If memory fades, will Valinor itself be lost?" "Not lost," Gandalf said gently, "but hidden so deeply that only the most ancient hearts will know where to look, and soon those ancient hearts will be gone." For hours, they spoke beside the fire, the teapot growing cold as Gandalf unraveled the greater story, the fading memory of the firstborn, the weight of the world shifting as the age of elves gave way to the age of men. The land remembers, Gandalf said softly, the streams, the stones, the wind, but memory needs keepers, or it crumbles like old parchment. The elves are leaving, and men do not remember the way the earth remembers. Then who will keep the memory? Lóthwin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gandalf's smile was soft but certain. That is why you were shown the path, my dear Hobbit. You are not the keeper of gold, nor the bearer of rings. You are the keeper of memory, because memory is the only treasure the West ever meant for Middle-earth to keep. The next morning, before dawn, Gandalf stood once more at Lóthwin's garden gate. They did not say farewell, not truly, for no road ever truly ends when memory holds it fast. But before the wizard turned to leave, he placed a small stone in Lóthwin's hand. It was smooth and round, as if shaped by years of gentle waves, and though it was simple in appearance, the moment Lóthwin held it, he felt a warmth bloom beneath his skin, the same warmth he had felt upon the silver path. A piece of the West, Gandalf said softly, not to keep you longing, but to remind you that you have already walked the path. You are no longer searching, you are remembering. That day, Lóthwin took up his quiet life again, tending his garden, sweeping his path, sharing stories with the younger hobbits beneath the old oak on the hill. But now, his stories were not only of dragons and dwarves and treasure. He told of soft paths beneath silver light, of the hum the earth carries when it remembers something ancient and beautiful. He spoke of the land itself longing for the West, not with sorrow, but with the gentle ache of a heart remembering home. And though most hobbits called it fancy, there were always a few, just a few, who listened with wide eyes, their hearts stirring faintly, as if some small memory within them had just awakened. Lóthwin never left the Shire again. His feet had walked far enough, and his heart had found peace in knowing the road still existed, whether he walked it again or not. But sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the stars were clear and the breeze carried the scent of distant rain, he would stand at his garden gate, the small stone in his hand, and smile softly to himself. The West was no longer far away. It was beneath his feet, within his heart, woven into the soil and sky and sea of Middle-earth itself. And so the mystery was not truly solved, because some mysteries do not need solving, they need remembering. The secret paths to Valinor were not lines drawn on maps, but memories carried gently, from earth to heart to story. And as long as one hobbit remembered, the West would never be lost. Without ceremony, without fanfare, Lóthwin became a quiet guardian, not of gold, nor power, nor glory, but of memory itself. And though no songs were ever written of him, the earth remembers him still, whenever the west wind stirs the grass and the silver path shimmers just beyond sight. The days that followed Gandalf's visit passed softly, like leaves drifting down a slow-moving stream. Lóthwin returned to the quiet rhythms of life in the Shire, tending his garden, sweeping the path, gathering apples in the orchard when the sun was high, and lighting his lantern when the dusk settled gently over the hills. But though the work of his hands was the same, something within him had quietly changed. The world itself felt different, as though the air carried a quiet hum beneath every breath, as though the grass remembered his steps and the earth itself was listening. He was no longer searching for the westward road. He had carried a piece of it home within him. The longing that once ached beneath his ribs had softened into something quieter, a remembrance, like the scent of rain after the clouds have parted. He knew now that the secret paths to Valinor were not always walked with feet. Sometimes they were walked with memory. When the young hobbits gathered beneath the old oak at twilight, Lóthwin's stories changed too. He still told of dragons and treasure, of brave adventurers and narrow escapes, but sometimes, when the sky blushed gold and the wind came from the west, he would tell them of something quieter, a path no map could hold, a road made not of stone, but of longing itself. The young ones would sit wide-eyed, their imaginations alight, and some, just a few, would gaze westward with a glimmer of quiet wonder, as though they too could feel the pull of a song too soft for words. Lóthwin never told them everything, for some memories are too precious to be spoken aloud. But in the way he walked the earth, in the gentleness of his hands as they brushed over soil and stone, in the way he paused each evening to watch the last light melt into the horizon, he passed the memory along. He became, without ceremony or fame, a keeper of the earth's longing, and though no songs would ever be written of Lóthwin of the Shire, the land itself remembered him. The old oak on the hill grew taller in the years that followed, its roots digging deep into the soil, and some said the tree seemed to hum on quiet nights when the stars were clear and the breeze carried the scent of salt and rain. Some said Lóthwin had planted something beneath its roots, not a seed, but a story, and that the tree was singing it back to the sky. Lóthwin's garden flourished too, though no one could explain why the west-facing hedge always bloomed first, or why the breeze through his orchard always smelled faintly of the sea. The other hobbits would laugh about it, saying it was just one of those oddities that happened near the edges of the Shire. But Lóthwin knew. The land remembered. Years passed, as they always do, and Lóthwin grew older, though not heavier with age. Some say the westward wind had lightened him, leaving something inside him as clear and weightless as sky. And though his hair turned silver and his steps grew slower, his heart remained young, as though some piece of the light beyond the sea had settled quietly inside him and never left. He never left the Shire again. There was no need to chase the path when the memory of it was already his to keep. And each time the west wind stirred the leaves, or the sunset lit the sky like molten gold, Lóthwin would pause and smile and feel the world hum softly beneath his feet. And so, his story became part of the land itself, not written in books, not sung in halls, but carried in the hush between heartbeats, in the sigh of the grass, in the way the stars seemed just a little brighter above his hill. For the straight road, my sleepy fellows, does not only lie across the sea. Sometimes it lies just beneath the earth, waiting for those who remember how to listen. Lóthwin lived his days gently, And when his time came to leave the Shire at last, there was no fear in his heart. For though no ship came to carry him across the sea, the memory was already there, waiting to carry him wherever the next road might lead. And if you stand upon that western hill today, my dear sleepy fellows, and the air is quiet, and the wind comes from the west, you might still hear it, that soft hum, the memory of a hobbit who listened to the longing in the earth and carried its story home. The path to Valinor was never truly lost. It only needed someone to remember. And that, my sleepy fellows, is the quiet gift Lóthwin left behind, not gold, nor glory, nor fame, but the simple, gentle memory of the way home.